for most of its history, this island had no roads. Not bad roads, none. If you wanted to reach the village at the top, you climbed 800 steps cut by hand into the side of a volcano rising straight up out of the sea. Everything the island ever imported came up those steps on someone's shoulders or on the back of a donkey. Furniture, building materials, everything. Engineers looked at this place and gave their verdict. A road here was not possible. The slope was too steep, the rock too unstable, the island too small to be worth the effort. So a local man with no formal training, no engineering degree, nothing, signed up for a correspondence course that arrived through the mail. He studied it, and then he and his neighbors started cutting a road out of the cliffs with hand tools. It took them 25 years. When the first section was finished, there wasn't a single car on the island to drive on it. They had to wait 4 more years for one to actually arrive. This is Saba, 5 square miles of volcano in the Caribbean, 2,000 people, and almost nothing here that wasn't dragged out of the rock by the people who live on it. How does anyone survive on an island this small and this steep? And how, with almost nothing, did they build an entire world at the top of it? Getting to Saba is its own adventure before you've even arrived. You can't fly here directly from very far away. Most people land first in St. Martin, the busy regional hub, then board a tiny propeller plane for the short hop across the water, or take the ferry, fittingly named the Edge, and then comes one of the most famous landings in all of aviation. Saba's airport has the shortest commercial runway in the world, just 400 meters of tarmac, barely longer than the deck of some aircraft carriers, with sheer cliffs dropping into the sea on 3 sides and a hill blocking the 4th. Only a handful of pilots on Earth are certified to land here, and they train specifically for it. Passengers tend to go dead silent on approach, then burst into applause the second the wheels stop rolling. It's the perfect welcome, honestly, because it tells you exactly what kind of place this is before you've even stepped off the plane. Somewhere that simply refused to accept it couldn't be reached. Saba rises out of the Caribbean like it was shoved upward in a hurry. It's a single volcano, only about 13 square kilometers of land. Its slopes running almost straight from the waterline into the sky. At the top stands Mount Scenery, roughly 887 meters, the highest point not just on the island, but in the entire kingdom of the Netherlands, and it's usually wrapped in a soft collar of cloud, which is exactly how Saba earned its nickname, the island in the clouds. To reach the summit, you climb again, over 1,000 stone steps through the forest. And here's something that shouldn't be possible on a speck of land this size. Saba holds 3 completely different ecosystems stacked directly on top of one another. Down low, it's dry forest and rugged coast, tide pools carved into black volcanic rock. Higher up, the slopes turn green and lush. And right at the peak sits a cool, dripping cloud forest, a miniature rainforest of gnarled, moss-draped elephant trees that feels like a different country entirely. Around 20 hiking trails thread through all of it, lovingly maintained by the island's own conservation foundation. Because on Saba, the land isn't just scenery, it's tended like a garden. Walk from the coast to the summit, and you pass through what feels like 3 countries in a single afternoon. From hot, cactus-studded rock by the sea, up through warm green hillside, into the cold, silent, mist-hung forest at the top where every branch drips. Naturalists travel a long way just to see this, because packing this much ecological variety into so little space is almost unheard of anywhere on Earth. The whole island is basically one small mountain doing the work of an entire continent. The wildlife matches the strangeness. Isolation has done its slow work here too. Saba has its own iguana, a large, dark, almost black lizard only recently recognized as its own endemic species, found essentially nowhere else on the planet, which islanders regard with a mix of pride and exasperation, since the handsome thing has a habit of raiding their carefully tended vegetable gardens. On a rock this cutoff, even the lizards became something the rest of the world simply doesn't have. One thing you won't find much of here, though, is a beach. Unlike the rest of the Caribbean, Saba has almost no sand at all. Its edges are cliffs falling straight into deep blue water. There are only two tiny exceptions, and the strangest is Wells Bay, where a small black sand beach appears and then vanishes again with the shifting tides, there for a season, gone the next. On an island that made everything else by hand, even the one beach comes and goes exactly as it pleases. If you came to the Caribbean to lie on the sand, you've come to the wrong island. Saba offers something else entirely. To understand the people here, you have to understand how alone this place used to be. Before the road, before the airport, there was only the sea and the rock, and the one way up from the water was that staircase of 800 hand-carved steps known simply as the ladder. Everything that ever reached Saba came up it, on human backs and donkeys' backs, sacks of flour, timber, a church organ. When a piano was delivered, a team of men physically carried it up those steps. For centuries, this was daily life, an island where the price of every single object was the sweat of hauling it step by step up the side of a volcano. Ships couldn't just dock either. There's no natural harbor on Saba, only rough water against rocks, so for generations, even coming ashore meant riding a small boat through the swell to a landing point, then making the long climb up. Goods, mail, newcomers, the sick, the dead, everything passed through the same narrow gauntlet of sea and stone. There's a half-forgotten monument to just how impossible that made ordinary things. In the 1880s, a company tried mining sulfur from the volcano's flanks and hired more than 100 Sabins to do it. But with no harbor to load the ore, they had to run it out on a cable strung 100 meters above the crashing waves to a tiny offshore rock where boats could actually reach it. The whole venture collapsed within about a year, beaten not by a lack of effort, but by the sheer difficulty of getting anything on or off this island at all. To leave was hard, to reach it was harder, and to stay meant accepting that whatever you needed, you'd very likely have to provide for yourself. A place like that either breaks its people or it makes them extraordinarily self-reliant. Saba became the second kind. When you can't count on the outside world to bring you anything easily, you learn to make and mend and build and grow things yourself. And you learn to lean hard on your neighbors because they're all you actually have. That habit, forged on the ladder over centuries, is the thread running through everything else on this island. And it's exactly why, when the engineers said no, the Sabins heard something closer to not yet, which brings us back to the road. By the 1930s, Sabins were tired of the ladder and wanted a proper road connecting their villages. They asked the experts. Dutch and Swiss engineers studied the terrain and gave the same flat answer: impossible. The volcano was too steep and too unstable. No road could hold on those slopes. One islander refused to accept that. Josephus Lambert Hassel, a local man with zero engineering background, enrolled in a civil engineering correspondence course, taught himself the mathematics of grades and curves from books and lessons mailed across the ocean, and decided he would build it anyway. Work began in 1938 entirely by hand. There was no heavy machinery on the island, so the men of Saba cut and laid the road with shovels and wheelbarrows, pouring concrete on grades engineers had sworn could never be paved. The first stretch opened in 1943. Bit by bit, village by village, the work continued until 1958, when the road finally reached Hell's Gate, the highest village, tying the whole island together at last. Roughly 14 kilometers of it, all by hand. What that actually took is hard to overstate. Not one heroic burst of effort, but 20 odd years of ordinary people, farmers, fishermen, their sons, showing up day after day to move a mountain one wheelbarrow at a time, guided by a neighbor who'd learned engineering out of envelopes in the mail. No company did this. No foreign contractor. The island built itself a spine by hand because nobody else was going to. When cars finally arrived, the story goes, there was barely any road ready for them. And when the road was ready, there was barely a car. The two had to wait for each other to catch up. Drive it today and you feel the impossibility they conquered. There are no traffic lights on Saba, no straight stretches to speak of. The road corkscrews up and down the mountain in tight, dizzying turns, clinging to slopes that still look like they should shrug it off. The descent toward Wells Bay is so steep it feels like the drop on a roller coaster. Locals joke that the single most important business on the island is the brake shop. It's a road that by every expert opinion should not exist, and the people who were told it couldn't be built drive it casually every single day. The road was only the most visible thing Sabans had to conjure for themselves. There was also the small matter of water. Saba has no rivers, no springs, no natural freshwater source at all. So for centuries, the island has drunk the sky. Nearly every house is built around a cistern, a covered tank that catches and stores rainwater off the roof, a practice Dutch settlers established here as far back as the 1680s. When rain comes, the cisterns fill. When a long dry spell hits, they run low, and the whole island has to be careful with every drop. In recent years, the island's been building a proper drinking water plant to ease that pressure, and in emergencies, fresh water has even been shipped in and desalinated. But the basic bargain remains what it always was. On Saba, your water is whatever falls from the clouds plus whatever you had the foresight to save. Self-reliance here isn't a slogan. It's plumbing. It's worth sitting with that for a second because it's easy to romanticize a place like this. The truth is that living on Saba has always meant doing without things the rest of us take completely for granted. No fresh water in the ground, almost no flat land to farm, nearly everything from a bag of rice to a sheet of plywood arriving by boat or by that tiny plane and priced accordingly. The island's answer, over centuries, was never to wait for someone else to fix it, but to adapt, catch the rain, build strong and small, make what could be made, carefully bring in the rest, and share. That's the quiet discipline sitting underneath all the postcard beauty. So who are the people who built all this? Around 2,000 of them live here, of mixed Dutch, English, and African descent, alongside a lively community of people who came from elsewhere and simply never left. Officially, this is a special municipality of the Netherlands, but the everyday language is English, a legacy of its tangled history. The villages with names like the Bottom, Windward Side, St. John's, and Hell's Gate are almost impossibly tidy. By local custom and regulation, the traditional cottages are all painted the same way. White walls, green shutters, red roofs, so that from above, the settlements look like toys scattered across the green. The Bottom, despite its name, actually sits in a high volcanic bowl and serves as the island's little capital, home to the government offices and the medical school. Windward Side, perched higher up in the path of the trade winds, is the busiest village, with most of the small hotels, restaurants, shops, and gallery. And Hell's Gate clings to the slope near the airport, the last village the road reached. Between them, the entire population of Saba, every family, every business, every school, fits into a space you could walk across in an afternoon. This is one of those rare places where doors are seldom locked. Everyone knows everyone. Crime barely registers. In a recent year, the entire island recorded fewer than 15 property crimes total, the kind of number most towns manage in a single weekend. There's no real incentive to steal on an island where you'd be recognized instantly with nowhere to run afterward. Front gardens overflow with flowers, neighbors keep an eye on each other's kids and homes, and a stranger walking the road gets greeted without fail by nearly everyone they pass. Help is never far away. For all its ruggedness, Saba is one of the gentlest, safest places you could ever set foot. It's also quietly more open-minded than its size suggests. Back in 2012, this tiny remote island became the first place in the Dutch Caribbean to legally marry same-sex couples, a small community, far from anywhere, simply deciding for itself what kind of place it wanted to be. That's very Saba. When this island makes up its mind about something, it doesn't much care what the wider world expects of it. An ordinary day here moves at the pace of the mountain. People walk or drive the winding road between villages to the small shops, the school, a handful of restaurants and cafes. There's no rush hour to speak of, unless you count the one tight corner and windward side where a few cars occasionally have to wait for each other. Clouds slide over the peak, burn off, and gather again. Chickens wander. Gardens get tended. In the afternoons, hikers head for the trails and divers head down to the water, and by evening, the whole island seems to gather on porches and in small bars, everyone catching up on a day everyone else already mostly knows about. Threaded through all of it, surprisingly, are several hundred young medical students. Since 1992, the bottom has been home to the Saba University School of Medicine, which draws around 300 students from abroad to study on this remote rock. They've quietly become one of the beating hearts of the island's economy and daily life, filling the cafes of Windward Side, renting the rooms, bringing a jolt of youth to a place that once seemed to be fading away, because Saba really was fading. Its population dropped from around 2,500 at the start of the 20th century to roughly 1,000 by 1970 as young Sabans left for work in the United States, Curacao, and the Netherlands. The road, the airport, the diving, and the medical school together pulled it back from the edge. It's a strange and honestly wonderful thing to witness. An island at the very edge of a country, kept alive in part by young doctors in training from all over the world, learning medicine on a volcano wrapped in cloud. The mix gives Saba an unusual texture. Old island families whose roots run back centuries, living side by side with students who'll be gone in a few years. Somehow it all works, folded into the same tight, walkable, everyone knows everyone community. If there's one thing that defines this island, it's that the people here make things not as a hobby, but as a way of life, and their crafts tell the whole story of Saba in miniature. Start with lace. Back in the 1870s, with the men away at sea for months at a time, the women of Saba took up a delicate needlework once called Spanish work and made it entirely their own. When international mail reached the island, they began selling their lace by post to customers across the United States, running a thriving little export business straight out of their front rooms. By the late 1920s, Saba lace was bringing in serious money every year. It's one more example of the island's genius. Told there was no economy to be had on a remote rock, the women of Saba simply stitched one by hand and mailed it to America. That making spirit is everywhere still. In Windward Side, a local glass artist runs a studio where visitors can sit down and, with a little guidance, learn to shape molten glass into beads and jewelry in a single afternoon, and small galleries around the village showcase island painters and craftspeople. There are workshops now for jewelry making, textiles, even crafts paired with cocktails, a whole tiny creative economy grown from the same instinct that built the road. If you want something on Saba, the fastest way to get it is to learn to make it yourself. But the most Saban thing of all might be what comes out of people's kitchens. Saba Spice, a homemade spiced rum brewed not in any factory but in family homes, and nearly every family guards its own secret recipe. It's cooked slowly on the stove for hours with fennel, cinnamon, clove, brown sugar, and strong rum until the whole house fills with the smell of it. Islanders sip it after dinner over ice, mix it into cocktails, cook with it, even pour it over ice cream. You cannot buy real Saba spice in a shop abroad. To taste it, you more or less have to be welcomed into someone's home, which is exactly the point. The food tells the same story of a place making the most of what it has, and two worlds meeting on one small rock. Because this is a Dutch island in the Caribbean, The kitchens blend both. Dutch bakeries turn out pastries and croquettes, and even capsalon, a Dutch fast food invention of fries, meat, and garlic sauce, served a few thousand kilometers from where it was dreamed up, right alongside Caribbean rice and peas and fresh caught fish. There's even a homegrown vegetable found almost nowhere else, the Saban cabbage, a hardy green that took to the volcanic soil so completely the island put it on its own coat of arms. And since 2023, Saba's had its first craft brewery, a handful of locals brewing beer right there on the island instead of shipping it in, one more small act of doing it themselves. And Saba's proudest dish comes from just offshore. Spiny lobster, a clawless Caribbean cousin of the northern lobster, hauled up from the rich waters of the Saba Bank. Many restaurants keep them alive in tanks, so you choose your own. And every November, the island holds a lobster fest in their honor, a small, whole community celebration of the one thing the sea gives them in abundance. It's all of a piece in the end. The lace, the glass, the rum, the cabbage, the beer, the lobster. This is a place that has always had to turn what little it has, a needle, a stove, a reef, a stubborn imagination, into an entire life. Nothing here is mass produced. Almost everything is made quite literally by hand. Now down we go, all the way down, because the most astonishing part of Saba isn't on the island at all. For all its drama above the surface, Saba might be even more extraordinary below it. The waters here are protected as the Saba National Marine Park, established back in 1987, and they're famous among divers as some of the healthiest, most pristine reefs anywhere on Earth. The same volcanic forces that built the island rose underwater into great stone spires called pinnacles, mountains of lava climbing from the deep seafloor toward the light, but never quite breaking the surface. Divers descend along these towers through clouds of fish, past sheer walls and dark caves and thriving coral, in water so clear it can genuinely be disorienting, the seafloor falling away beneath them into blue. It was divers, in fact, who first put Saba on the modern map, arriving decades ago for these reefs and spreading the word about an island almost nobody had heard of. Just offshore lies the Saba Bank, a vast submerged atoll stretching roughly 100 kilometers, one of the richest marine habitats in the entire Caribbean, a hidden underwater world larger than the island itself, home to sharks, turtles, huge schools of fish, and the island's prized spiny lobster. On an island with barely any beach, the sea isn't for lounging. It's a wilderness, a livelihood, and a wonder all at once, and Saba has been careful since 1987 to protect it rather than plunder it. Another quiet decision by a small island to look after what it has. None of this comes without real risk, because Saba's greatest strength, its dramatic volcanic nature, is also its greatest danger. The volcano itself is dormant, sleeping rather than dead. The more immediate threat comes from the sky. In September 2017, Hurricane Irma, one of the most powerful Atlantic storms ever recorded, roared directly over this region and savaged the island. By some assessments, around 60% of Saba's natural vegetation was damaged or destroyed, and yet the island did what it always does. Its sturdy little cottages, built low and strong for exactly this, largely held. The community pulled together, cleared the roads, patched the roofs, and helped each other, and Saba rebuilt. The forest, given time, began to come back too, but the warning was clear enough. As the climate warms and these storms grow fiercer and more frequent, a tiny, isolated island that depends on the outside world for so much, most of its food, its fuel, its supplies, all arriving on that same small plane and ferry, knows exactly how exposed it really is. A few bad days of weather can cut Saba off completely. There's a deeper fragility too. This is a community of only about 2,000 people, and it has come close to disappearing before. What saved it once again was the things it built. The road, the airport, the diving, and the medical school, which together gave people reasons to stay and reasons to come. Being self-reliant has kept Saba alive for centuries. It has never once made it safe. All of which explains why Saba feels so unlike the Caribbean most people picture. There are no sprawling resorts here, no cruise ships disgorging thousands of day trippers, no long golden beaches lined with bars. Saba never built any of that, and it's proud not to have. People call it the unspoiled queen. And they come here for the exact opposite of the usual holiday, to hike 3 ecosystems in a single day, to dive those untouched pinnacles, to learn to shape glass or taste homemade rum in someone's kitchen, and above all, to slow down in a place where the doors don't lock and the pace is set by the clouds. The best time to visit is the dry season, roughly December to April, safely outside the hurricane months that run through the second half of the year. And there's an honest tension in even making a video like this. Saba's whole charm is that so few people go. Its magic is fragile, and it could be loved to death like so many beautiful places before it. But the island has been careful, choosing small-scale, low-impact tourism over cruise ships and resorts, betting that a slower, gentler kind of visitor will help it survive without spoiling the exact thing that makes it worth the trip. It's not an easy island to reach, and it's not trying to be. That difficulty is exactly what's kept it whole. So we come back to where we started. They were told the road couldn't be built, and they built it. They were told the runway was impossible, and they carved it out of a cliff. They were told there was no economy to be had on a rock this small, and the women stitched one out of lace and mailed it across an ocean. They had no fresh water, so they learned to drink the rain. Piece by piece, by hand, together, the people of Saba made an entire world where the experts said none could exist. It's a small place, and a fragile one, exposed to the storms and dependent on a thin lifeline to the outside world, and it would be wrong to pretend life here has ever been easy. Behind the flower gardens and the postcard cottages are centuries of doing without, of hauling and saving and making do. But that's exactly what makes Saba so quietly moving. This isn't a paradise that was handed to anyone. It's a paradise that was built deliberately and stubbornly by ordinary people who kept being told it couldn't be done. Every meter of that road, every drop in every cistern, every stitch of that lace is somebody's answer to the word impossible. It might be one of the most quietly inspiring places on the planet, proof of what a few thousand determined people can make of a bare rock when they simply refuse to give up on it. So here's the question we'll leave you with. The next time the whole world lines up to tell you something can't be done, that it's too hard, too steep, too small to be worth it, what will you do? Will you believe them? Or will you pick up a shovel like the people of Saba and start building anyway? Tell us in the comments. We genuinely read them. And if you'd like to keep discovering places that quietly defy the odds, the ones that never made the postcards, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.